Hey friends. I am in Seattle, Washington. I'm only out here for a couple of days, but I'm at my brother's place, and he just so happens to have a beautiful keyboard set up right here, right by the window. You get to play piano and look out the window into a tree-lined street. It's quite something. I'm not suffering. And I had a thought on the plane here. I had this thing come to me, and then I show up, and what's sitting on the piano but the song Desperado by the Eagles, Don Henley and Glenn Frey, and the two tie together perfectly. So I'm going to start out with that, and then I'll talk a little bit. So, on the flight here, I was doing some kind of a bit of cross training in my audible listening, if that's a thing. I was listening to a book that I have spoken about on this post a number of times. It's a book that is actually written in German. I don't know if there's a translation into English. It's called Erzählende Affen. Which basically means storytelling apes. And it's a really super interesting book about narrative, the role that narrative plays in human history, in human culture, in human cognition. It's just a really in-depth survey of all the ways in which story shapes our perception of the world, and how really, I mean, I've listened to this entire book before, and I'm kind of about maybe 2 to 3 hours in, a little less than a quarter of the way through again, and we're coming up on the section where they talk about how the structures of the mind are so hardwired for storytelling that after childhood, once we sort of get our base myths, our sort of personal cultural imprinting, personal and cultural imprinting, and we get conditioned to and habituated to certain stories, we filter all incoming information through those stories. And those stories shape what we see. They shape what we don't see. And what this amounts to in the kind of in circumstances where we're not conscious of this. You know, the whole point of a book like this is to make people a little more aware of what's happening internally. What are we actually doing? What filters are we inadvertently applying to the world? And there's a ton I think we can learn from a kind of exhaustive survey of all the different aspects of how narrative influences our lives. But one of the things that kind of gets flagged is the phrase that came to me is we can become trapped in a prison of preference, which I thought was just kind of a clever phrase, but it's also a real thing and a real kind of dangerous thing. It's a form of restriction and lack of freedom, a prison where the bars of the prison are our own desires and impulses. And if you, I think it's readily apparent what's problematic about that. If our own desires are the things keeping us in prison, then it's almost like we love Big Brother, right? Or Stockholm syndrome, where we love our captor because we've now become conditioned to actually prefer thoughts, behaviors, narratives. A lot of this amounts to narrative and meaning making. We prefer narratives that keep us from true freedom. So after a while, and you know, I kind of go immediately to a level of like, we need to rebel, we need to have a revolution against this prison. But of course, the revolutions can really only happen in ourselves. The only thing to overthrow is our own conditioning and our own complacency in living according to preferences that are in some ways kind of unexamined. And even if they've been examined, if they haven't been truly challenged and truly vetted for whether or not this is truly the best way to live our life, and whether or not this really helps us achieve either the liberation that we're looking for or the love that we're looking for, the kind of community that we want to create, the kind of society that we want to live in, if we haven't kind of vetted our own internal structures according to those questions, or in response to those questions, we're living in prison. That's all there is to it. We are imprisoned in a prison of our own preferences, and so Desperado is all about that. You know, Desperado, why don't you come to your senses? You've been out riding fences for so long now. Oh, you're a hard one. I know that you've got your reasons. These things that are pleasing you can hurt you somehow. Right? Don't you draw the queen of diamonds, boy. She'll beat you if she's able. You know the queen of hearts is always your best bet. I mean, these are just, for a pop song, these are pretty fantastic metaphors. Now it seems to me some fine things have been laid upon your table, but you only want the ones that you can get. Desperado, why don't you come to your senses? Come down from your fences, open the gate. It may be raining, but there's a rainbow above you. You better let somebody love you. Let somebody love you. You better let somebody love you before it's too late. I'm pretty sure I'm not in the key that I just played it in. What a great song, and what a kind of beautiful poetic description of exactly this thought that I had on the plane. We're trapped in a way of being, a way of thinking, a way of living, a way of acting, a way of loving, a way of interpreting the world that's just not, that's ultimately suppressing and restricting our spiritual flowering, our actualization, our us living in full engagement with the world. But we can't blame anybody. You know, we can attribute some responsibility to past generations or our conditioning or our parents or our education system or blah 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 blah. But ultimately, we're all kind of in this. We're all responsible for our own interior, right? I mean, Sadhguru makes a really great. He makes a kind of very salient point, but in a playful way. You know, we don't get to determine what happens outside of us. We don't, when something happens in the world, we don't get to dictate what happens in the world or what other people do or what other people say or what other people feel. But what happens in me, what happens inside of us, we should be in charge of that. We actually are in charge of that. We just maybe sometimes need a reminder that we're in charge of that. And the only way out of that prison is to start asking questions. Start questioning the narratives that guide us, especially when we have an aversion to doing so. Especially the ones that kind of, it triggers us to take a look at them. It triggers us to question them. You know, I mean, if you look at like the American political landscape right now, there's an awful lot of, whatever side you're on, there's an awful lot of reluctance to question the narratives that guide us. But the only way we're going to learn anything or go anywhere is by doing that. That's the only way that either individual evolution and development takes place, or for that matter, collective. You know, whether we are emphasizing the community we want to build, or whether we're emphasizing our own individual self-actualization. In either case, we got to look at the narratives that are guiding us and be willing to undo those structures that are actually keeping us from seeing other truths. So that was a hilarious synchronicity that happened to me today. I'm out here for a lecture at a community college. My brother runs the program out there, and I get to go speak to a group of students tomorrow, which is going to be super cool. And I will definitely report back about how that goes. But thanks for watching. I appreciate you. Great to be out here. Great to have you out here with me. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you soon.